"Get out! You don't belong here!" That was the voice that shattered the calm. That was the moment the illusion of equality cracked wide open. Before we dive into this gripping story, I want you to tell me what country you are watching from. Drop it comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button, turn on notifications, because this channel isn't just about stories, it's about truth, power, and reclaiming dignity. Now take a breath, because what you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's a story of humiliation, of power, of a man who refused to shrink. This is the story of Darius King, a black CEO who was kicked out of first class, not because of a mistake, not because of a policy, but because someone looked at him and decided he didn't belong. But what they didn't know was who he really was and what he was about to do. Darius King wasn't born into wealth. He wasn't handed opportunity. He earned it, every inch of it. Raised in a modest neighborhood, surrounded by the echoes of struggle and the whispers of doubt, Darius learned early that the world wouldn't hand him anything. He was the kid who stayed late at the library, who taught himself to code on borrowed computers, who turned rejection into fuel. By the time he was 30, he had founded a tech company that revolutionized logistics across Africa and beyond. By 35, he was on Forbes lists, speaking at global summits, investing in startups, and mentoring young entrepreneurs. But despite all that, the accolades, the wealth, the respect, there were still rooms where people didn't expect him to walk in. And one of those rooms was the first-class cabin of a luxury airline. Darius wasn't flashy. He didn't wear gold chains or designer logos. His power was quiet, his presence commanding. On that day, he wore a tailored navy suit, carried a sleek leather briefcase, and held a first-class boarding pass. He was flying to a summit where he was the keynote speaker. The airline had even partnered with his company in the past, but none of that mattered when he stepped onto the plane. The flight attendant didn't ask for his ticket, didn't greet him. She simply blocked his path. "Sir, this section is reserved for first class." "I know," he replied calmly. "Here's my boarding pass." She glanced at it, then at him. Her expression didn't change. "I'm going to need to verify this," she said, turning away. Passengers nearby watched, some with curiosity, some with discomfort, a few with silent judgment. Minutes passed, then security arrived. "Sir, we're going to need you to step off the aircraft." No explanation, no apology, just the assumption that he didn't belong. And so, Darius King, billionaire CEO, global speaker, investor, was escorted off a plane like a criminal. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The walk back through the terminal was long, not physically, but emotionally. Darius didn't shout. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply walked, head high, heart burning. He sat in the lounge, pulled out his phone, and made 3 calls. First, to his legal team. Second, to the airline's board. Third, to his media strategist. Because what had just happened wasn't just a personal insult. It was a systemic failure. Within hours, the story was drafted. Not as a rant, not as a viral outrage, but as a calm, powerful statement. "I was removed from a flight today, not because of a policy, but because of a perception. I'm sharing this not for sympathy, but for accountability." The post went live, and the internet exploded. Thousands of comments poured in, stories from others who had faced similar treatment. Hashtags trended, news outlets picked it up. The airline responded with a generic apology. "We regret the inconvenience caused to Mr. King." But Darius wasn't interested in apologies. He wanted change. Behind the scenes, his legal team was already in motion. They reviewed contracts, pulled up partnership clauses, and flagged violations. The airline's board, where Darius held significant shares, called an emergency meeting. And within days, the crew involved was suspended. Within weeks, they were dismissed, not out of vengeance, but accountability. Darius didn't just reclaim his seat. He reclaimed the narrative. The incident became a case study, not just in corporate bias, but in personal power. Darius didn't sue for millions. He didn't demand public groveling. He asked for one thing: mandatory bias training for all staff. He funded it himself. He helped design the curriculum. He even spoke at the first session. Bias isn't always loud, he said. Sometimes it's a glance, a pause, a decision made in silence. His story became a TED Talk, a documentary, a movement. Young Black professionals began sharing their own stories. CEOs reached out to collaborate. Airlines revised their training programs. And Darius? He kept building, kept mentoring, kept showing up. Because for him, power wasn't about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules. This story isn't just about Darius King. It's about every person who's ever been told they don't belong. It's about the quiet battles fought in boardrooms, classrooms, airports, and offices. It's about the assumptions that still linger, the glances that still sting, the doors that still close. But it's also about resilience, about standing tall, about knowing your worth. Darius didn't just fight back. He built a bridge. He turned pain into purpose, humiliation into education, bias into reform. And that's the message. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to rage to make change. You just have to stand. So wherever you are, whatever country you're watching from, remember this: you belong, you matter, and your story is still being written, so now you've heard it. Not just a story, but a reckoning. Darius King didn't just walk off that plane. He walked into history. He turned humiliation into a headline and silence into a statement. He reminded the world that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, deliberate, and unstoppable. This wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. It was about rewriting the rules that were never meant to include him, and doing it with grace, precision, and undeniable force. Because when you know who you are, no one can tell you where you don't belong. This story is for every person who's ever been underestimated, for every dreamer who's been told to wait their turn, for every leader who's been asked to prove themselves twice. Let this be your reminder. You don't need permission to take up space. You don't need validation to stand tall. You don't need to shrink to make others comfortable. Darius didn't just reclaim his seat. He reclaimed the narrative. And now it's your turn. Drop your country in the comments. Let the world know where you're watching from. Let this story echo across borders, cultures, and generations. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now is the moment. Hit that button. Join this movement. Because this channel isn't just about content, it's about courage. We tell stories that matter, stories that challenge, stories that change the game. So wherever you are, whether you're in Port Harcourt, London, Accra, New York, Nairobi, or Johannesburg, remember this: you belong, you matter, and your story is still being written. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning.